Yeah, I I extend a warm welcome to ma'am, both Barney ma'am and Ramya ma'am, on behalf of API and our chairperson K.E. Sampath sir. And I take this opportunity to salute the COVID-19 warriors who have been working tirelessly all over the world, and especially to mention in our district, especially the physicians of the Vellore Medical College and the physicians of CA Christian Medical College Vellore and the Tiruvannamalai Medical College. They work tirelessly to make the mortality rate, reduce the mortality rate in our district and the neighboring district, and they keep it at a very low rate. And I also urge all our friends and the participants and the doctors to be strict precautions while doing their private practice, as our life is more precious than the patient's life. And actually, many of them had a doubt that we can keep a CME on this COVID-19. Actually, to be frank, in the past 3 months, we have been listening to number of webinars, and our mind and the phone has been saturated with the COVID-19 data. So we made a point that maybe this speech we will stick to the we will stick slightly away from the COVID-19, so that it will be a just relaxation, and we will concentrate on other parts of medicine. And I should thank the previous uh, members of the API, especially Satish sir, for supporting me and guiding me in through this conducting of this API meet everywhere. Like whenever I call, he doesn't hesitate to support me. He answers very calmly the number of questions I ask. So I thank everyone for participating it. Now next, the release of API journal. Actually, I have to thank Adil Arsu because he has been the editor of the API journal for a long time, and he is doing the work very perfectly. And now we have released the API journal. Next channel, next slide. Next slide. Okay. Yeah, this is the API. This is our API journal this month edition, and it will be released shortly in our WhatsApp. I need everyone to have a go through it and comment on it. Now, next to the introduction of the speakers, because Anita ma'am is not available due to the technical issues, so I will directly go to the introduction of the chairpersons. First, I'll go with the speaker about Barney ma'am. I think we need no introduction about Barney ma'am because everyone knows. Uh, anyway, just few words about ma'am. Yeah, Barney ma'am she has been working. She started as an assistant professor in general medicine in Vellore Medical College, and then promoted as, and she took care of the department, and she worked hard to get the department for recognition, the MC for the PG general medicine, and she has a number of publications, and also she has participated in 4 clinical trials, and she has professional membership of IMA, API, and RSDA, and DPS, DIPSI, and DFSI, and she takes part, and she's a regular resource person of serial write-ups on diabetes and metabolism in Vellore IMA journal, and our special interest is prevention of diabetes. And 2002, ma'am started an ongoing program for children 6 to 16 years named as Odi Vilayadu Papa to cultivate healthy lifestyle. So I think ma'am has number of posts held in the Vellore Medical College, and also she played as a nodal officer in antiretroviral therapy center, swine flu ward, nodal officer for non-communicable disease prevention program, and administration officer in charge of Vellore Medical College. So I over to Barney ma'am for the role of timely insulin therapy speech.
Thank you, Dr. Manikandan. Respected Chairman K. Sampath, the Vellore API chapter, Treasurer Dr. Manikandan, Secretary Manikandan, dear Anita, the Treasurer, and my senior friends and all my colleagues and friends, and also Ramya Madam. Good evening to all. And I have been asked to talk on role of timely insulin therapy and devices in optimal diabetes care. So it's a vast topic. I'll just restrict myself to about 15 minutes. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. Next slide. Let me take this opportunity to, please wait. Previous slide. Previous slide. Let me take this opportunity to share some of my experiences in the post-lockdown period. The case number 1 was Mr. M, a 32-year-old male IT professional from Bangalore, held up at mother-in-law house in Vellore because of lockdown. Here is history of excess sweating, presumed to be due to hot weather in Vellore, Of course, it was quite hard in Vellore during those periods. He took plenty of juice and fruits, and his wife noticed loss of weight about 6 kg in 1 month. His wife, being a nurse, checked his blood sugar and it was 400 milligram, but she doesn't want to believe that. So she brought him to me, and his fasting sugar was 259, postprandial 380, HbA1c was 11.5, and urine acetone was 1 plus. But obviously, he was not in any distress but for the excess sweating, not in acidosis. His family history was negative for diabetes. Though he has lost 6 to 8 kgs, his BMI is 26, he is on the overweight side, and he has also abdominal obesity. So obviously, the clinical diagnosis of type 2 diabetes was made in him, whether they like or not. The next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. The second patient is 28-year-old male, no symptoms. Routine blood checkup for insurance revealed random sugar of 359, fasting 290, postprandial 421, HbA1c 13.1. He has strong family history, normal BMI, urine acetone trace. Third case. Next slide, please. Next slide. It was a 16-year-old 10th standard student enjoying holiday without exams in grandma's house. He lost about 8 kgs in 2 months. His random blood sugar was 306, fasting 170, postprandial 326, HbA1c was 10.6, urine acetone negative. He has positive family history. His mother was a diabetic. The child also had acanthosis nigricans. The mother told 2 years back post glucose test was done because of his obesity and itching. It was 160 milligram, and he was given some touch therapy, some acupressure treatment or something like that for a year. Almost they wasted 2 years, the precious time. Next slide, please. So all the three patients were obviously type 2 diabetes, newly diagnosed, drug-naive patients. Though they are newly diagnosed, the diabetes has not newly developed. We know the development of type 2 diabetes is progressive, and before the patient reaches the cutoff value, the biochemical value to diagnose diabetes, nearly a decade before that, there were a lot of biochemical changes in the body, especially the insulin resistance starts going up. It goes up and reaches the peak and remains there throughout the disease. During that time itself, the incretin effect falls. The insulin beta cell function also falls. When I say beta cell function, it's not just insulin secretion. In fact, insulin secretion may be more to compensate the insulin resistance at the early stages. When I say beta cell function, it is the beta cell sensitivity to the glucose stimuli. It is a dynamic measure, usually measured with glucose clamp and also the pro-insulin-insulin ratio. Once the hyperinsulinemia as a compensatory mechanism exists, then afterwards it fails to compensate anymore. The insulin levels starts falling down. Once it reaches a critical level, the hepatic glucose output starts coming out without any inhibition. That's the time where we see high fasting blood sugar. And also later the postprandial sugar starts rising. Initially the postprandial glucose starts rising or post glucose level starts rising. Later even the fasting sugar remains high. All the three patients which I saw were probably at this stage with or without microvascular or macrovascular complications. The high fasting sugar and the catabolic state of weight loss, everything indicates the patients are insulinopenic. Theoretically, they will definitely do better with insulin replacement therapy. But imagine the patient were already very depressed with the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. Explaining them about the need for insulin and making them to get convinced is very difficult. And also, prescribing insulin is not just giving a slip. We need to teach them the ingestion technique, the storage, the biomedical waste disposal, about hypoglycemia. So many things we need to tell them, make them understand, and it needs extra effort from our side. Of course, the patient has other problem also, insulin resistance, incretin defect, and we have so many drugs to tackle all these defects. And we can also have sulfonylurea, some insulin secretagogues. The patient will have some amount of insulin and SGLT2 receptor, so many drugs. When the HbA1c is very high, even the guideline says we can start with multiple OADs at the start itself. But which one is the best for the patient? I believe insulin is the best for these patients because of this reason. Next slide, please. Next slide. There was a meta-analysis published in Lancet. Previous slide, please. Previous slide. The reason why I believe insulin to be started in these cases is mainly because of this study. This was in Lancet published in 2012, where they examined benefits of treating patients with insulin right from the time of diagnosis of type 2 compared to OAD. It was a meta-analysis, and all the studies showed there is definite improvement in beta cell function and reduction in insulin resistance when the patients were started on insulin from the beginning. Is it not worth taking the extra effort from our side and also to make the patient convinced for insulin when we can reverse some of the pathophysiological process? Not only that, with short-term insulin therapy right after the diagnosis, more than 45% of the patients had remission. We should remember in any chronic illness, there is a compensatory phase, then there is a decompensated phase. Even in the decompensated phase, there is a phase which can be reversed, and later there is a phase which cannot be reversed. Definitely, it's our duty to make use of this situation, the reversible phase and the compensated phase, to make use of the patient to get back to normal. So I decided to start insulin for these patients, and I started insulin. Within 2 days, the sugars, of course, as we expect, comes down. Some things, as we expect, it won't come down also. If the sugar remains very high for a longer time, insulin also takes time to show some benefit. But before that, the patient will start improving otherwise. These patients showed weight gain, and they all felt better, sense of well-being improved. Though they told they don't have any symptoms, definitely after starting insulin, the sense of well-being improved. Next slide, please. Next slide. So, of course, insulin overcomes glucotoxicity and benefit beta cell rest. So, in another study also, more than 50% of patients remained in remission at the end of 1 year with insulin. Next slide, please. So, definitely, insulin will be the better choice in a newly diagnosed patients with high sugars. So, our goal of insulin therapy as a short-term goal is, of course, to ensure effective glycemic control with low risk of hypoglycemia, and the long-term effect to prevent chronic complications. Next slide, please. About long-term complications, we are all well convinced with the UKPDS study. If every drop of 1% of HbA1c is associated with decreased risk of stroke, and also all complications, micro, macro, and also the death related to diabetes. Next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. We all know insulin is a good anabolic hormone. Previous slide. So good anabolic hormone, it has anti-inflammatory effect, it's neuroprotective, cardioprotective, and an important point which is more important at this situation is Insulin stimulates sodium hydrogen exchanger and increases the pH and reduces the possibility of the virus adhering to ACE2 and cell infection. In this COVID pandemic, it has another benefit also. Next slide, please. Next slide. Even otherwise, in this pandemic, all diabetic patients need to be under good control. Uninfected type 2 patients should intensify their metabolic control. And of course, insulin is a safe choice under most circumstances. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. So once decided, having decided for insulin therapy, which insulin, what dose and what device. Next slide. I prefer in very high blood sugars, the regular insulin, which is very effective. We are sure of the effect and of course short-term duration, so need to be given frequently. Of course, in acute illness, that is the choice. But in these situations where the patient is not acutely ill, we can select our insulin, either regular or intermediate or pre-mixed insulin. Next slide, please. So for those three patients, I advise shorter acting insulin in the daytime, morning and afternoon, and premixed insulin in the night. But our Indian diet, the another reason why we can choose the premixed insulin also as for matter of convenience is our Indian diet contains more carbohydrate, whether rural or urban or modern or traditional diet, all diets contain very high carbohydrate. And most of our time is in the prandial state. So maybe pre-mixed insulin also will be ideal for these patients. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. At present, we have three types of pre-mixed insulin. One is the shorter acting human insulin with intermediate insulin, 30% and 70%, the pre-mixed insulin. Then the biphasic analog insulin, the Novomix we call, the insulin analog, rapid analog with the intermediate acting analog, the protamine crystallized insulin analog. Then also we have the most sophisticated premixed insulin, the insulin deglutec and insulin aspart combinations, the Rhizotec. Next slide, please. Though these costly insulin also as equally powerful, but the risk of hypoglycemia is very less with the better analogs. Next slide, please. Next slide. About the device. Of course, we have the conventional vials and syringes, but they look frightening for the patient, little bit cumbersome, particularly if the patient has little difficulty in hand coordination or visual impairment or tremors. And it's also difficult to transport, inaccuracy in withdrawing the correct dose, difficulty in mixing, insulin wastage also is more. Loss of needle sharpness in pen and vials is because we prick in the cork and then again in the skin, means the sharpness is blunted and more pain occurs. To overcome all the barriers, we have pen. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. The pen insulins actually remove all the barriers. Previous slide. It's easy. Once we switch over these patients with vials to pen, definitely it's more convenient, and also the compliance also is improving. These pens are more discreet and accurate, and particularly the needle is very small and tiny, and it causes less anxiety and easy to attach and detach. Next slide, please. Next slide. So pen devices offer improved adherence, improved glycemic control, reduced healthcare resource and safety benefits. So ultimately, even it is cost saving. Next slide, please. Next slide. Since the innovation of the pen in 1985, a lot of technological advancement has occurred. Next slide, please. Now the present pen, Novo 4, is easily detachable and easy to, next slide. We can reverse the numbers also. If we have inadvertently put the dose in a higher then if we want to reduce it, we can always reverse it. But previous pens were not like that. So it needs very low force to inject. Easy forward and backward dialing is there. Then easy to read scale. End of dose confirmation click is there. Easy pushback piston rod and quick fit and easy cartridges. And end of content feature also is there. It's very quick and simple to demonstrate also. Next slide, please. Next slide. So not only that, even after 5 years use, the accuracy is maintained. They've studied in 5 simulated years of use, about 5,475 automatic injections, still the accuracy remains good. Next slide, please. Next slide. Now we have Flux Touch Pen, which is more convenient, particularly to convince the patient for a shorter time, shorter duration of use. They are use and throw pens, definitely cheaper than investing for a permanent pen. These pre-filled pens have no push button extension, but accuracy and consistent of dosage still maintained. Next slide. Next slide. The studies to show it needs very low injection force. Next. Next. Next slide. And even in low dose or medium dose or high dose, the accuracy is maintained. Next. Next. And it's very easy to inject. It's the most preferred pen, particularly the disposal pens. Next. Next. Next slide. So finally, so apart from easy use, very little force, accuracy and consistency, efficacy and safety is maintained with no flux pens. Next. Next. About the needle. Previously, the needles were little longer and thicker. The present needle is 32 G girth and only 4 millimeter. Not only that, the lubricant coated needles are definitely very less painful. It causes very less pain. About the storage, when we want to store this pen in the fridge, it's better to remove the needle and store it, because when we store it along with the needle, the metal part of the needle gets chilled, and this chilled needle, when it pierces the skin, gives little extra pain. Next slide. Otherwise, these needles are very less pain, very less irritation, no bleeding, no skin irritation. Next slide. Next slide. It's very easy to change also. Next slide. Now a word about biosimilars. Why should we talk about biosimilars now? Insulin is actually a biological product. All along it was considered, though it's from a biological yeast or E. coli or biological organism, it was considered as a drug because insulin is there even before the terminology biological is described in medicine. But now, recently, in 2020, US FDA has confirmed that insulins are biologicals. So, there is a need to discuss about biosimilars. Next slide, please. Biosimilars are biological product similar to the innovator. It is similar but not identical. Next slide, please. Next slide. So, is it safe? That's the question. Next slide. There is potential risk of some immunological discomfort or pharmacodynamic, pharmacokinetic variations and batch to batch variability and quality assurance need to be checked with these biosimilars. Next slide. Next slide. So insulin delivery devices are unique to each company, and each pen accepts only that company cartridge. Particularly, Novo pen will accept only the Novo cartridges. But All-Star pen, I have seen my patients with All-Star pen using some Biocon insulin like that. It fits, but we cannot assure the dosage. There can be dosage error. So it's better always to note down in the patient's case sheet what sort of pen, what company pen the patient has, so that we will prescribe the same company cartridge to the patient. So no confusion will come. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So insulin is at present in our pharmaco system. It is an essential medicine. The innovator insulins are biologics with proven efficacy and safety. Now even the Rizotab, the costliest insulin, also has come down in pricing. About 500 rupees less we are able to get now. Next slide. Next slide. So the take-home message is early insulin initiation is physiologically intelligent and positively alters the course of the disease progression. Large proportion of patients with type 2 require better early and long-term glycemic control, and there are ways to overcome the treatment barriers, though it appears a little complex. But compared with vials and syringes, pen devices offer improved adherence, improved glycemic control, and lesser hypoglycemia. Next slide. Next slide. But still, most of the patients remain on multiple OAD therapy too long. Next slide. Next slide. It's not only clinical inertia is the reason. Early phases patient doesn't have much symptoms, so he doesn't know the need to control it very effectively. So unlike addition of insulin, other subsequent OADs offer little benefit. Next slide. Particularly if the patient remains on multiple OADs uncontrolled for a longer time, like this patient. Initial few years, maybe 5 to 8 years, is most of the patients is wasted. Maybe we were also not very much aware of the need for early control. That's one reason. So now we know about the metabolic memory, and now we know the need to control the blood sugar level at the early phase more intensively. Now hereafter maybe the picture will be different. Next slide. Next slide, please. So I thank you very much, particularly the Novo Nordisk, for giving us this opportunity to meet all our friends. Thank you very much. Thank you, APA. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the wonderful speech about the timely insulin initiation. Actually, and you have explained about the insulin from all the types of insulin, about the pen with detail. Actually, it's a very big problem for almost all the physicians, because many of our patients doesn't, even though we tell them to start insulin in time, they have that inertia to start on insulin. Now I next go on to thank you, ma'am, and you can post your questions in the chat box. We'll have this discussion later after the next speech is over. And next, I invite Ramya ma'am to give her topic on heat stroke. To share about the Ramya ma'am, actually ma'am has completed MBBS in Madras Medical College, followed by MD General Medicine there in Madras Medical College, and then ma'am did her DNB in NB National Board of Examinations, and ma'am has completed MRCP in Royal College of Physicians, London. And then ma'am joined CMC, and she has a long career of around 15 years. I think by this May, she has completed 15 years in CMC. She started as an assistant professor, then associate professor, then as professor. And then ma'am has been a guide for undergraduate and postgraduate thesis about for more than 15 people. And regarding the awards, ma'am has got the best paper second prize in Epicon 2014 on outcome of critically ill HIV positive patients admitted to the MIC Medical Intensive Care Unit. And she has a number of publications in peer-reviewed journals about around the number crosses around 50. And over to you, ma'am. Welcome.
Good evening. I would like to start by thanking Dr. Manikandan. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And go Bharani ma'am. Like ma'am said, we should have met long back. Thank you, ma'am. And for APA for giving me this chance, and for Dr. Anita, who has motivated me to talk about heat stroke. My talk will be on heat stroke. I thought we'll talk on heat stroke because Vellore is one of the hotter places in Tamil Nadu, and this is one of the hotter months. Like April and May is when we have the high temperatures, and we do get a lot of patients with heat stroke during this time. So that is why I thought this topic is very important, and I had chosen this topic. The world is classified based on a Vladimir Koppen classification, and as we can see, northern and the rain shadow area of Tamil Nadu comes under the dry arid climate where we have a risk of heat stroke. That is why heat stroke is very important topic for us who practice in Vellore. So the another thing I wanted to talk about is one concept called wet bulb temperature, which we have to actually look at during the months of April and May. It's easily available in most of the meteorological websites. It's a useful indicator of temperature. Most of us look at the daily temperature and see that Vellore has the highest temperature, but that is actually not the true temperature what the human body feels. The temperature the human body feels is measured by the wet bulb temperature. This is the temperature where the bulb is wrapped by a wet wick. So when the water evaporates, the bulb will cool, and that will be the actual temperature which is felt by the human body. So because we cool by evaporation, our sweat evaporates from the body, and that will cool our body down. So when there's a high humidity, the wet bulb temperature is very high. Heat stroke is also very important in the current scenario of global warming. So what the scientists feel is that there will be more and more cases of heat stroke in the future. So as per wet bulb temperature, the 35 degrees centigrade is the maximum limit. That is a dry temperature of 46 with 50% humidity. So if we look at the wet bulb temperature, we'll know like how much patients we can expect and what is the risk of heat stroke as per during a particular day. So how does heat affect human beings? So there's direct impact on health services. There's the increased transmission of diseases because as we can see during the summer months is where we get these minor cholera outbreaks, and also it damages infrastructure, and a lot of heat related illnesses occur due to which human beings will need hospitalization. So this is how a rise in temperature will affect the human body. So India is very highly prone for a heat stroke, but this statistics I'm going to give you is 5 years old. So in 2015, there were 1,908 deaths due to heat stroke, and heat stroke was the cause of 5% of all mortality due to natural causes. Men are more affected than women. This is expected because men go out or are working more in the sun compared to women. And undivided Andhra Pradesh, we are very close to Andhra. So undivided, the original Andhra Pradesh with Telangana had the maximum number of deaths due to heat stroke in India. And also, when they had analyzed previous data compared to 10 years back from the National Sample Survey, they found there was a steady increase in numbers. So heat-related illness, if we ask ourselves, have I ever had a heat-related illness? We all of us will have the answer yes, because most of us would have had the heat rash, which is malaria, and currently because of the use of PPE, seeing patients with PPE, a lot of physicians are experiencing heat exhaustion. And that is a real problem which is in hot countries like India when we have to use PPE. So it is a spectrum. Initially, patients start with having heat edema, and then they can progress to heat cramps or heat tetany, followed by heat syncope and heat stroke. So the heat stroke is the final end of the spectrum where the body has gone into an irreversible mode, or so we think when they come to us very sick with multiple organ dysfunction. So there are two definitions. One of the definitions that we've been traditionally following is when there's a core body temperature of more than 106 or a core body temperature of 40 degrees with hot and dry skin and central nervous system abnormalities. But the Japanese Academy of Acute Medicine have said that a high temperature, core body temperature is not necessary to diagnose heat stroke. This is very, very important because when we expect patients to have a high core body temperature, what they found in their studies over a period of many years is that we miss lot of cases with heat stroke. So they have come up with the definition that a person who's got a history of exposure to very high temperature, like a fire person or somebody who has run in a marathon, and they have come with the Glasgow Coma scale of less than 15, high serum creatinine of 1.2, and a Japanese Academy of Acute Medicine DIC score of more than 4, then we should consider that this person has got a heat stroke. This definition will actually improve the diagnosis of heat stroke, and also it'll quicken. We can do it very quickly. Assess patients, like if they have a history of exposure to high temperature and have a low GCS, we can quickly diagnose heat stroke rather than waiting for a temperature measurement. So this is what the Japanese Academy felt over when they had collected all the cases of heat stroke throughout the country. They found that heat stroke is, like I said previously, a spectrum. So in the early spectrum, there's dizziness and there's sweating and cramps, and this is mild. So here, we just need to remove the patient from the heat exposure and just give them replace water and electrolytes. And stage 2 is when people present with headache, vomiting, fatigue, and there's lack of judgment. And when we examine them, and we can again here, you can give them oral fluids and replace electrolytes. This is just heat exhaustion. The third stage is when the body has gone beyond all this, is when they develop the heat stroke. And here, when they develop heat stroke, they need inpatient care. This is very, very important. So how does a human body compensate when we are exposed to heat? So we are warm-blooded animals, and our body exists within a very narrow range of temperature. So whenever we are exposed to heat, there's an increase in the metabolic rate, and the core body temperature increases, which means there's an increase in cardiac output. So the blood is diverted from the core of the body to the periphery. So here there's cutaneous vasodilatation and there's sweating. So once there's sweating, the water will evaporate from the skin surface, and there'll be cooling of the body. So this is a normal response to heat. But when you're exposed to heat and the body is not able to compensate, what happens is there's a decrease in central venous pressure and increased core body temperature, and there's cell anoxia. So once there's cell anoxia, what happens is there's endotoxemia. The gastrointestinal wall becomes you cannot say porous, but it starts allowing in bacterial endotoxins to escape into the bloodstream, and because of that, it elicits a systemic response, inflammatory response, and the patients develop a heat stroke. So there's a multi-organ dysfunction, the central nervous system, liver dysfunction, acute renal failure, and coagulopathy. So the body is here but not able to cool itself, but it goes into a SIRS mode. So on the pathophysiology is, on exposure to hypothermia, there's a stress response from WBCs, and because of it, heat shock proteins and pro-inflammatory cytokines are released from the body, which results in an SIRS and heat stroke. So who are the people who are vulnerable to develop a heat stroke? So mainly less able people and pregnant. Also, they have found that pre-pubertal children are highly prone to develop heat stroke because because of their mass to body surface area ratio, and the theory is that their response to heat is not fully developed compared to an adult. So pre-pubertal children are highly susceptible. This is very important because now during this lockdown, if we send our children out to play, we should be very aware of this problem. Also, the poor and the displaced, as we have seen in the past few months, the children and the elderly, the athletes. There's a current increased interest in fitness in India. So everybody is into marathons and running outside in an already hot climate. So we have to be very careful about these people. And also outdoor and manual workers, people who are working in building construction and agricultural laborers are highly vulnerable to develop a heat stroke. So this is again the same slide. When there's excessive exposure, they can develop a seizure and organ failure. So typically, as we know, there are two types of heat stroke. There's a classical heat stroke. So the classical heat stroke will occur in summer months. It's an epidemic. So we know, like, we get ready in April and May in Vellore. We know the summer has coming. The elderly are there. There'll be an epidemic of heat stroke, and so we are ready for this. And also, the other type is exertional heat stroke. So exertional heat stroke is seen even when the weather outside is normal. But these are people who are having they're exerting themselves, so they are already their metabolic rate is high and they're generating heat within the body. So like athletes, firefighters, agriculturers, and soldiers. And exertion heat stroke can start within 60 minutes of exertion, and it occurs without exposure to high temperature. So this is very important, because again here the Japanese definition of having heat stroke without a high core body temperature will come into play. So the other important thing which people do in the West, and sometimes here in India also, leave children and animals in the car. So because there's no air circulation in the car, the children quickly develop a heat stroke. So we should never do that. So these are things we should remember. So how do you diagnose? How do I suspect somebody to have heat stroke? So because elderly can have delirium and they can have encephalopathy due to other causes. So we need to have a high index of suspicion. So in a vulnerable population during the summer months, anybody with fever and CNS dysfunction, we have to always consider heat stroke. So once they have come, what are the prognostic factors? How do I know that this person is going to survive? Who is going to do well? Who needs to be taken care of immediately? So the people who are at the high risk of mortality are people who have been transferred from a healthcare facility, and when they have a high core body temperature, when the GCS is less than 12, the age is more than 100, and the systolic BP age is more than 80. I'm sorry, systolic BP is less than 100, and they have comorbidities such as cardiac failure. Cardiac failure is a very important risk factor for mortality due to heat stroke, because the main compensation for heat, as we have seen, is cardiac. There's an increased cardiac output with the blood moves from the core of the body to the periphery. So this is not possible. And drugs such as diuretics, beta blockers, are high SAPS-2 score, and prolonged prothrombin time, use of inotropes in ICU, and high serum creatinine. So these are all the poor prognostic indicators for anybody who has presented to the hospital with a heat stroke. So once we have diagnosed heat stroke, even if we are outside, what do we do to the person? So we have to apply cold compresses. First elevate their foot, use cold compresses. You can even spray water and fan, which will actually provide one of the main methods of cooling a patient, which is evaporation. And use ice packs if possible. Pour water mainly over the head and neck. So this is one of the things they use in people who have got marathon. So they have these cold immersion buckets. So anybody who's having a marathon and has got a heat exertion, who's like, they immediately immerse them in the cold water. So they get so that the cold body temperature is brought on very quickly. The other thing which is available, which is commonly used in pediatrics, are these ice blankets. So they are actually filled with ice, and the person is made to lie down inside, and it very quickly brings down the core body temperature. So basically the temperature can be brought down by immersion or by evaporation, where when we spray water on them and put a fan next to them. That is the most common method of bringing down the core body temperature which we practice. Then ice water bladders and also rectal and gastric lavage can be done. So currently there are intravascular cooling devices which are available. These are available because of the practice of hypothermia in people who have had trauma. So these devices are available worldwide, and the sensor and the catheter is placed in the inferior vena cava, and the blood is drawn out like a dialysis machine, undergoes quick cooling, and it's sent back to the body. So this kind of devices can bring the body temperature down very quickly to 32 degrees. So these also can be used in an ICU setting. So this is how the device works, where there's a heat exchanger, and this is it, and the rate at which the temperature falls can be easily managed by a control panel. So the whole thing is under our control. The other thing we can use are these gastric lavage. So we use ice water and we can lavage. We have cold normal saline which is present, which is given as IV fluids, and we can use the cold normal saline which is kept in the fridge ready in an ICU, and use this instrument to lavage and reduce the core body temperature. So what is our cooling target? Our cooling target is to bring down the temperature by 0.1 degree every minute. The temperature has to be brought down very quickly. So heat stroke, as we know, there are till now there have been only traditional methods where we just cool down the patient. Once MODS develops, we just give tertiary care support and wait for the person to recover. But currently there are new therapies which are being tried. There is continuous plasma diafiltration and plasma exchange, both of which have shown to improve outcomes. Like in people who have developed MODS, the patients come out of heat stroke, and they do very well, even though they have developed MODS. So these two are the emerging therapies. There are no studies in these two therapies, but there are only case reports. So our patient has come with heat stroke. Most of them, there are patients who we have seen who come every year with heat stroke and all that. And also there are a lot of patients who have come with heat stroke because of exertion and they want to go back to work. So what do you tell these people when they say, I want to go back to work, I want to immediately start my work? So when people come back with heat stroke, the advice to give them is no exercise or no working in the sun till 7 days after release from medical care. And they have to follow up, and we have to evaluate whether the MODS has improved. And then we can clear them to work in a cool environment. Unfortunately, this might not be possible for people who are quite poor and they're working in the farm, but this is the advice we can give them. So and try heat tolerance test only after 1 month post incidence. And most athletes can be cleared for full competition if they are able to tolerate heat which is by examining the heat tolerance in a laboratory. So I would like to present some data. This is actually from a single unit. This is from our unit. We had around 37 patients with heat stroke over the past 3 years. And the mean age was 61, which is expected because, like I said, most of our patients come during summer. So this is during an epidemic of heat stroke. And we had calculated the heat index. Heat index is another method of calculating how temperature will affect the body. So one we have is wet bulb temperature, other one is a heat index. Most of our patients had been unwell only for 2 days. A lot of them had cardiac side effects. And the core body temperature when they came was between 103 to 105. Actually, if you take the definition which is given by Bukama, which is used all over the world, that the core body temperature has to be 106, then we would have missed most of these patients. It is probably because they came to the ward after being cooled in casualty. So most of them we used evaporative cooling method. Cold saline infusion we used only in 59%, and 2/3 of them had MODS, and only 2 patients needed ICU care. None of the MODS correlates actually was significant and could predict mortality. One interesting thing which we noted during our study was the overall mortality, which was over the past 15 years had come down very significantly. Initially, when patients came to heat stroke to our institution, the mortality was around 75 to 80%. But over the past, and when it was studied 5 years ago, it was around 50%. But recently, when we analyzed this year's data, last year's data, it was only around between 12 to 15%. So we were wondering what had got this change. The only change which has happened was we had managed to get air conditioning in our emergency department. So this rapid cooling, when they came into emergency with quick diagnosis, the presence of cool air had significantly reduced mortality. So the most important thing which reduces mortality in heat stroke. So we have to be highly aware and a high clinical index of suspicion for this disease. So we always think acclimatization is for only high altitudes, but acclimatization is even for high temperatures. Like I hear a lot of people who are from Chennai will say, I don't like Vellore, it's too hot. And people who are from Vellore will say, Chennai is too hot because it's humid. So actually what Vellore people say is correct. Chennai is too hot because the humidity is high and because of the wet bulb temperature is high. So whenever you're traveling to a new place, if somebody is traveling from Vellore to Chennai, if you're planning to work in the sun, do not work more than 20% of your usual, like if you're going to usually work for 8 hours, work for only 2 hours in the first day and keep on increasing the duration of work over the next 4 days so that you get acclimatized to a new hot area. Also, thing is, there are people who say you keep on walking in and out of an AC and that's why you're not acclimatized to Vellore. You keep on walking in and out of an AC, that's why you don't get acclimatized. But actually, air conditioning does not affect acclimatization, and being very physically fit improves your ability to acclimatize to a hot temperature. So what do I want to say at the end of this talk is, I want to say that high index of suspicion, early cooling is very important, and also we should protect ourselves. We should keep at home. We should close windows during the heat, open window, because otherwise the hot air will enter into the house and it will keep the place very, very hot. So during the day, keep the windows closed. Hang shades, use wet towels, and stay in the shade. And during summer, avoid strenuous outdoor activities. Do not go for hiking or anything during summer or even the summer marathons. And do not leave children and animals in the car. That's a very important risk factor for developing heat stroke. So I would like to finish by saying we need to protect ourselves from heat stroke. And thank you to API for giving me this opportunity to talk on heat stroke. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It was a very good presentation, crispy presentation, and you had presented a real your data from CMC and explained about clearly the concepts, and it was a very good talk. And regarding the questions, I think, ma'am, we'll go to the question session. Actually, first to Barney, ma'am. Actually, ma'am, is there any difference between the regular insulin and insulin analogs? Like in your practice, when you are using, like what are the indication where you select insulin analogs over the regular insulin, or the both are same? Ma'am, you're not audible, ma'am.
No?
Yeah, ma'am. Yeah.
As far as the onset of action is concerned, analogs starts acting earlier than the usual animal insulin. The usual insulin starts about 30 to 40 minutes. So they need to be taken about 30 minutes before food, which is not very convenient and all the time not possible. That way analog is better. If the patient can afford, it's always better to go for analog. And all these pen devices, the cartridges are only analogs. So that way it's good. Analogs in a way better. But efficacy wise, not much difference. Similarly, the Rizotac also is not, doesn't mean if the patient doesn't show much response with the analog, if we change to Rizotac, they show better response. It's not like that. But the risk of hypoglycemia is much less.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Next to Ramya, ma'am. Ma'am, when you think about the alternative diagnosis in heat stroke, especially CNS infection, for example, you treat the patient. For example, patient comes with a temperature of 104 or 106, 104, and you suspect, and patient is drowsy, and you suspect heat stroke, and you are giving all the cooling measures, and the patient doesn't. Like, when you think about the alternative diagnosis, like how long you do this cooling, and what makes you to think about the alternative diagnosis in heat stroke?
Because again, everything has to be, most of the people who come are elderly, and because we cannot just say they have heat stroke, we do start all treatment together. Like when somebody comes, we do start antibiotics, we do give them cooling and send the tests to rule out other diagnoses also. We give everything together at the first time, because if it's sepsis also, we cannot wait, because what makes the change is antibiotics. So we give everything together. We don't wait. Because again, heat stroke is a diagnosis of exclusion. There's no test will tell you this is heat stroke. So it's better to start treatment for everything at the same time.
And in all these cases in CMC, what you have seen, do you do CNS imaging for every patient, or you wait and then what is the basic role of CNS imaging in the patient of heat stroke?
The thing is, most patients do end up getting an imaging because it's an altered sensima. Everybody's worried.
Everybody.
They might have a subdural hematoma. But if you are very strongly suspecting heat stroke, it is not needed. But any patient with altered sensorium and an elderly, when you do not know why they have become unconscious, at least a minimal CT scan should be done, I think. Can I ask ma'am a question?
Yeah, definitely.
Ma'am, lot of patients will keep on, if you see, they keep on insisting they want their 4th OAD, 5th OAD. How do you convince them to go on to insulin? Because like you said, early insulin is very important, but they'll keep on bargaining with you, saying, please, what is your experience, ma'am? Because you would have handled so many more patients.
Yes. 90% of the patient we can convince. There will be 10%, whatever we say, they won't get convinced. For them, maybe we have to give up and take some time from them. Okay, this time we'll give, but we'll keep on telling the benefit of insulin for them. So otherwise, in the 90% of the patients, these 3 patients also definitely, particularly the nurse wife, never wanted insulin. But what I told, just for 10 days, only this one flux touch pen, till you this is over, you just take. Then I will stop definitely if you don't need. Once they get convinced, at least for few days, if they take, they know the sense of well-being with that insulin, all their problems getting reversed, though it's not very obvious to them to say outside, they get convinced. And we can continue as long as they require. So that way, these flux touch pens are very useful to convince the patient also. And for other patients who are on oral drugs for a longer time, for them, no, we can convince them by telling drugs, they spend more money for less benefit. As we keep adding more and more drugs, they end up with high expenditure. Compared to that, with the less expenditure of insulin, they get more benefit. So that time they get convinced.
Actually, to add one more point in regarding, actually, because I have seen Sheshali sir practicing, actually he had a patient who had a LADA. He had similar patient, like he had a weight loss of around 15 kgs, and he had polyuria, and he had classical lumbosacral plexopathy, proximal muscle weakness, severe peripheral symptoms, meralgia, paresthesia. He came and he was the same way. He was on 4 YSDs. He was on 4 mg of glimepiride twice a day, metformin 1 gram twice a day, and voclibose and pioglitazone. And instead of this, sugar is in 400 are in that range. And he was not at all convinced to start on insulin. And then sir told only one thing. He put him, he admitted, and he asked the patient, like he told, what he wants is weight gain only. Like instead of taking this many medications, he didn't weight gain. Sir told, I'll give insulin for only 5 days. You see whether you get any weight gain or not. If you gain a weight, then you can decide. If not, you can go away with you. That's what sir told. And he did. And especially the patient gained, within 5 days, he gained around 1.5 kg. Because of his stop with insulin. Then the patient got convinced, and he himself was willing to take insulin. That's what sir usually does. So he gives a time of 10 days, you try and come back and you tell me how are your symptoms. If okay, then you will wish. And I think sir convinced to sir, but it's a very difficult point to convince the patient for insulin, ma'am. I think,
Sir, Manikandan sir?
Yes.
Sir, there are a lot of questions in the question box, sir. You can
Where
just,
it is?
in the questions, you can just check in the questions.
Chat
Chat questions இருக்கும் sir. Questions தனியா ஒரு icon இருக்கு.
எங்க இருக்கு?
இந்த attendees
இருக்கு, ஆமா. அதுக்கு chat தான் இருக்கு.
Sir, or shall I read it, sir?
Yeah, read it.
Sir, to Ramya ma'am, Dr. Satish Kumar has asked about what is heat tolerance test.
I don't know, I should say, because we don't do. They have. I will get back to you. I will get back on the API group.
Yeah,
I'll tell you.
WhatsApp group. Yeah, definitely, ma'am. Definitely, you can text back.
Yeah, and he has asked another question, sir. In a
Yeah.
person taking neuroleptic brought with high temperature and altered sensorium, how to
Sensorium,
differentiate heat stroke from neuroleptic malignant syndrome?
Malignancy.
We usually take, because both heat stroke and neuroleptic malignant syndrome will have a raised CPK. We usually take the history of use of neuroleptic malignant syndrome as being a very strong indicator that it is more of a neuroleptic malignant syndrome rather than heat stroke, and we would try to treat it like that. That's all. That's only the history. There is no other way we can distinguish between both.
And Dr. Nandini Magesh has asked a question now.
Yeah.
Inotrope, if there is a hypotension, and which is preferred?
Which inotrope is preferred in hypertension?
The preferred inotrope is norepinephrine. Norepinephrine.
And Dr. Manoj Kumar has asked a question to Barney ma'am. Do we need to do antibody tests for young diabetics?
Insulin antibody test for young diabetics.
Young diabetes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Not all young diabetics will require antibody test to diagnose whether it's type 1 or type 2. most of the time, young patients, they have other evidences to say it is type 2 diabetes, like acanthosis nigricans, family history, and we know that they are not in acidosis. Younger patients, particularly children, when they come with the florid symptoms, when it is clinically we diagnose type 1 diabetes, that time to document it is going to confirm that it is type 1, we do antibody test.
And to Ramya ma'am, Dr. Manoj Kumar asked the question: how to differentiate between heat hyperexia and heat stroke, except for temperature difference?
Heat hyper?
Hyperpyrexia, ma'am. Heat hyperpyrexia and heat stroke, except from temperature.
Hyperpyrexia is like because of that's why it is very difficult to distinguish whether it's due to an infection, which is a hyperpyrexia, or because it's a heat stroke where there is no infection and only the body's reaction. One way they say is because of lack of sweating, which is seen in heat stroke, where there'll be absolutely no sweating. You see Bukama's definition, he says temperature of 106 with no sweating and altered sensorium means heat stroke. But if you see the other definitions, there is actually no distinction. There's no way to distinguish between a heat stroke with MODS or a sepsis with MODS. So that the only way you can probably distinguish is by the absence of sweating. But hyperpyrexia also there can be absence of sweating. One way is maybe a lack of response to paracetamol. Maybe those are the things you can see in heat stroke.
The next question to Barney ma'am, Dr. Shankar has asked: despite multiple OIDs and knowing insulin is provide better control, therapeutic inertia of timely insulinization is a challenge. And share your best clinical practice in breaking this inertia.
Yeah, that's what ma'am has said already.
Yes,
to the phone.
So now Anita madam is on line.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, ma'am. Welcome, Anita, ma'am.
Yeah, sir. So I just take this opportunity to
Welcome,
thank
Anita.
everyone. Hello, am I
Yeah,
audible?
ma'am. Yeah, audible.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I take this opportunity to thank everyone who actively participated this. And of course, I like to thank the speakers, Dr. Barney ma'am, who gave an excellent and brief discussion about the insulin, timely started of insulin to avoid the glucotoxicity. And of course, I like to thank Dr. Ramya ma'am, who struggled for so many months to talk about this heat stroke. At last, it made it happen, even though it is June. Thank you so much, ma'am. And of course, last but not least, I like to thank the audience who actively participate for their questions and discussions. And at last, I like to thank Novo Nordisk for effort and made it to happen this Virtue CME meeting. And thank you, one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Madam, one question to Ramya, madam. Madam,
Yes.
one question
Hello.
to Ramya, madam. Madam, my mother was telling this corona has saved people from dying of heat stroke. Did you see less cases in this pandemic, less of heat stroke in your CM?
Yes, ma'am. We did because a lot of people
in
are
the
not going out.
emergency room, did you see less cases in this year compared to the previous years? Because we were locked out.
Because of lockdown, definitely less cases. Definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
So Manikandan sir, over to you, sir. Hello, sir. Yes, sir.
Manikandan, if there is any more questions and if there is time, we can discuss, no? And also be online.
Madam. Manikandan sir, I will just call him, sir. I'm calling him now. 1 second. Sir is online now. Sir,
Yes.
Manikandan.
Yes, yes.
Madam is talking to you. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Narasimhan doctor wanted to have something, no? Some
Yeah, ma'am. But it's a one-way
discussion he
discussion.
wanted.
Yeah, ma'am. But it is. He wanted to ask about
Okay.
the. He wanted to ask about the practices of COVID-19, practical difficulties which we will face, how to manage this COVID-19 as point of practitioners, like general practitioners or practice, not
Okay.
institution, like how to manage this COVID-19 pandemic. What are the clinical practices? So he told to share our experiences in that, ma'am. But I thought it will be, if it is it will be a double two-way communication, it will be comfortable rather than a single-way communication. So you can share your experiences on.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
So thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for joining, ma'am. Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.